Hello, everyone, and welcome to my informative speech presentation. My name is Reid Wilson, and today I have a story for you about a man um, named Ernest Shackleton, who was involved in essentially what is considered to be the greatest survival story of all time. It was called the Imperial Transatlantic or Transantarctic Expedition. I assure you, this story will um, really give you a new idea and a new sense of what it means with the phrase that sometimes the journey can be more important than the destination itself. Um, so, starting out, Ernest Shackleton was born in Ireland, and at a young age, he moved to London. His dad was a doctor, and he wanted to move out to London for better opportunity in his medical pursuits. Um, During his time at school in London, he always had a great passion for geography and navigation, and looked up to other explorers and European explorers in his time. And he always had a longing for expedition himself. And by the time he was 16, he took a position as a merchant Navy officer in the Royal Navy for Britain. And he spent 4 years there, basically traveling all around the globe and learning about his craft as a sailor, as a seaman, and really just those times really crafted him into the leader and the person he was in this expedition that I'm going to be talking about today. So, Shackleton was involved in three major Antarctic expeditions, and the one I want to be focusing on is his third. He did two before this, and those were, he was not necessarily taking the lead on the first one and the second one he did. But this third one is the one he's most famous for and the one he's most known for. And that is the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition. So the year was 1914, and there was a similar to the space race in the 60s, in the sense that all the major economic powers of the world were vying for the first person to reach the South Pole. It hadn't been done yet, and at time technology, as far as navigation wise, and just having the resources and the ability to actually take a ship to Antarctica, and then after that walk somehow across Antarctica or use dog sleds to get to the South Pole was completely unheard of, and had been attempted a few times before that. Shackleton actually did attempt it in his second expedition, but he was unsuccessful. So this was his really big push to make that South Pole rush. Around the time 1914, he was putting out ads in the local newspapers in London, and was preparing to form a 28-person crew that would be sailing on the Endurance, the ship the Endurance, which is what they would take into Antarctica with them. He was very decisive in who he wanted, and he really looked at more personality traits more than anything. And by that summer, he had created his crew, and they were off. They set sail off to Antarctica, stopping in Argentina and Rio along the way, as well as other various places. Let's see here. So really, the idea for them was to reach the South Pole, land somewhere in one of the bays of Antarctica, and from there take dog sleds and mush their way to the South Pole. So when they showed up, it was a very heavy winter that year, and there was large sheets of ice in the water. I believe the word is floe or pack ice in the water. And the ship, the Endurance, was really built for this. They knew obviously that it was coming, but what they hadn't really figured out was the ship would break through the ice, but as it got further and further into the ice pack itself, it would the ice behind it would encase back in behind it. So that was kind of their problem. And eventually the ice got so thick before ever reaching land that it completely ensurfaced the ship, and they were stuck. So, realizing this, Shackleton decided to leave this, or not leave the ship, but pack everything out of the ship, and they would stay on camps on this sheet of ice. And the hope was for them that summer would roll around and eventually it would loosen up the ice enough to where they could get the boat and sail it back out. But the thing is, summer came and the boat didn't go anywhere. They would constantly be moving around and floating on the ice, just out in the ocean in the frozen cold. They spent, I believe it was around several months out floating around in the ice. Soon realizing now that they could die here, they decided to make an effort to go to land. They waited till the ice started loosening up a little bit, and their food was really running low at the time. But they said, we have to make a try for land. And really, during this time of these months waiting on the ice, Ernest Shackleton, who was the lead member of the group, really the legacy he left behind after this would be his amazing leadership qualities and his skills. He kept morale high between the crew and gave them constant daily chores to do. And also, he's very disciplined. He kept his crew very disciplined, especially with food and rationing out for food, because they really realized that they could be out there for quite a while. So eventually, food came so low, and there was no more need for the dogs. So unfortunately, they had to shoot all the dogs in order to eat them. And if you kind of dive into it on the internet, they really get into it and how terrible they felt doing this. Having the dogs as their companions, and they were supposed to bring them to the South Pole, and to do that was really just a necessary evil, they called it. So eventually, the whole crew decided to take everything they had on the ship, or what they could grab, and try to find land. And they grabbed two smaller lifeboats with them, some 20-foot lifeboats. And after months of floating around that ice, they decided to try and make an escape attempt. And one quote that one of the survivors wrote in his diary here was that during that, it was a 5-day expedition from the ice pack to an island called Elephant Island in Antarctica. And during that time, one of the quotes that one of them said, because they were so desperately low on food, was, this really stuck out to me, is they were eating biscuits, and one of the guys said, "We were so low on food, we looked at the biscuit for lunch, sucked on it we looked at the biscuit for breakfast, sucked on it for lunch, and ate it for dinner." And yeah, that was just crazy to me, and kind of stuck out, that quote there. So eventually they did make it on a dry land, and it was the first time that they had ever been on dry land for 497 days. So, if you can imagine over a year of being stranded, not alone, but also not even being on dry land, constantly moving around on floating ice. And eventually all 28 crew members were still alive and were on that piece of dry land on Elephant Island. After spending a few months there, they realized some things were better, obviously, than floating on ice. Now they could eat. There were seals that were there, so food wasn't as much of an issue, as well as penguins. So now they had a little bit more food security. And the crew was badly battered and beaten up after, living on ice for over a year now. So Ernest Shackleton, being their leader, and really battling through with the crew and making sure they were disciplined and hardworking, he decided to form a team of 5 people that would ride one of the lifeboats to South Georgia Island, which was where a whaling station was, where people, I guess, would hunt whales. And there was a small settlement on that island in Antarctica. They geared up their 20-foot lifeboat, added different compartments on it, put a canvas top on there, and really geared up for their last-ditch effort at survival and being rescued. After being away on this trip for now well over a year, and officially, being stranded from their ship for about 6 months or so, I believe it was now. So after that, they got their crew together and they left for South Georgia Island, 5 guys, and they left the rest, 23, it would be back still on Elephant Island for the time being. During their expedition, Ernest Shackleton and the other 4 crew members, they faced extreme weather, gale force winds. Some waves were supposed to be up to about 30 feet tall, all in a little 20-foot boat too, and if you can imagine. So they were really battling life and death on a day-to-day basis. Wow, it took about 15 days, and they finally made it to South Georgia Island, made land. And right before they were actually getting there, they experienced gale force hurricane winds. So they could actually see the island in the distance, but they couldn't get close to it because of the weather. So if you can imagine, how terrible that would be. You're that close to being there, but it's just, it's literally just a tease, just looking at it and not being able to actually go there. Eventually they did. The 5 crew members did make landfall, and from there, actually, they landed in a remote part of the island where the town was nowhere near. So Ernest, being the leader again, decided to take him and 1 other crew member, and they had to hike for a few days across mountainous landscapes and ice and snow just to get to this whaling station. And they eventually made it back there, and Ernest immediately got a crew back to the remaining people on the main island of Elephant Island, the 23 crew members, and to the 3 that they left behind just before on the hike. So really the legacy that Ernest left behind was this immense passion for navigation and really wanting to achieve the maximum possible things. But really also his leadership abilities and his ability to keep that morale high during all these crazy times that his crew was going through, and being able to push through absolute life and death moments on a day-to-day basis and somehow keep his crew going. And basically, after 6 months of being stranded, all 28 crew members survived the expedition. So yeah, that's pretty much the story there. As far as today, Ernest Shackleton does have a big statue of him out in London. He died not too long later on another expedition. He died fairly young of a heart attack, kind of a blood clot scenario there in his heart. But that was really his biggest moment and his biggest achievement was that expedition and really that story of survival. Today, also, people have tried to retrace his steps and follow his path and try and figure out where he was and try to make that same hike he did and I think and sail those same routes. And I think everybody's pretty baffled at their ability to do what they did, especially with the limited technology and resources that they had. Because at times they really had no idea where the heck they were, where they're going. They didn't have GPS or anything like that, of course. And yeah, today there's been movies and TV shows that have come out about this expedition and about Ernest Shackleton. And since he is a sir, he was knighted by the monarch there in the United Kingdom. And he really leaves behind a large legacy for future explorers. And even before I took this speech assignment, I had heard of Ernest Shackleton, so it was really thrilling for me to learn even more about him and do the speech. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got. So thanks for coming along and learning about this Sir Ernest Shackleton. Thank you.